Welcome to the History Ecosystem, a holistic historical adventure where we'll look at history not as a collection of disconnected facts, but a living ecosystem of relationships, forces, and patterns that shape societies and individuals. So I call it an ecosystem because it's a metaphor and a framework. It helps us understand these interconnected forces that shape history and our lives, allowing us to see ourselves within those systems and act more consciously within them. Alright, so at the bottom of the metaphor we have the tectonic plates, and these represent the large, slow-moving structures that influence society. So things like agriculture and industrialization, as well as capitalism and colonialism. It also represents ontologies and epistemologies, which are ways of being and knowing about the world. So for example, before the scientific revolution, we really interacted with the world and knew about the world strictly through a religious mindset. But after the scientific revolution, we moved away from religion towards rationalism and empiricism. And this just focuses more on what we can observe about the world we live in, rather than thinking about the supernatural. And next up we have the soil, which represents the accumulated history of the past. It includes people and societies, as well as institutions, cultures, and ideas. The roots connect us to the soil and the tectonic plates, and they're there to represent the fact that society doesn't just pop up on its own. It's a representation of the past and the tectonic plates. So next to society is the main trunk, and this represents things like Australia or America or China or Europe, and then the main trunk branches off into institutions, things like the family, government and education, as well as the legal system and the church, though the church is not as influential as it once was. And also too, there are things like health and the economy, as well as the military. So these main institutions then break off into sub-institutions. So like with the government, we have things like bureaucracies and departments, as well as political offices and factions. Then in education, you've got things like high school and universities, which then break off into teachers, students, administrators, and that sort of thing. So at the end of these institutions and sub-institutions, we have the leaves, which represent people. And the people are organized in hierarchies. Those of us at the bottom of the hierarchy or towards the bottom receive less resources, opportunities, and power than those at the top. Then we have the flowers, which represent culture, things like art, music, and literature, but also things like values and traditions and languages. So in a society, the leaves, the people, and the flowers, which are the culture, vibrate to create the atmosphere. So the atmosphere is things like social discourse and shared narratives, as well as conversations that circulate between people and throughout systems of technology like social media. And finally, we have the sunlight, which represents resources. This represents actual resources like wealth and land and food, but it also represents things like opportunities, access, and knowledge. So that's in a way a bit of an overview of the history ecosystem, but we'll continue to explore that in other videos because it's really going to set the scene for every conversation we have after this one. So next time we'll apply the metaphor to social organization in the Roman Republic. So I'll see you then.